Right. First, thank you for having me. Happy birthday to CNBC Africa. You've nailed the question in terms of what
Thanks.
really is the issue here. The issue is that Rwanda, along with other East African community countries, had taken measures to increase tariffs to try to phase out used clothing imports. And Rwanda stuck with this, while other EAC countries have taken a step back. And the issue that we're seeing now is that a trade industry in the United States filed a complaint and said that under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, states are required to reduce barriers to US goods. And in this case, with Rwanda increasing tariffs, the United States Trade Representative and ultimately President Trump decided that the United States would no longer allow apparel from Rwanda to enter the US market duty free.
Grant, why exactly did Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania fall back to the 2016 levels? Why did they pull out of the earlier proposed tariffs increase?
I think that they changed course because they have a lot at stake when it comes to their relationship with the United States and the African Growth and Opportunity Act in particular. If you look at the importation of used clothes, they go far more to Kenya and other countries than they do to Rwanda. And according to the US government statistics, Rwanda imported only about $17 million worth of secondhand clothes in 2016. And so it's not a huge industry in terms of how much it'll affect Rwanda compared to how much it would have affected Kenya or Uganda or Tanzania.
All right, that sounds rather very interesting. Now, we are still looking at something there that President Trump is announcing tariffs that are against key U.S. allies, and there is a talk of potential trade war between the United States and, on the other hand, with China and the European Union, on the other hand. But again, why does this rather smaller conversation with Rwanda, the dispute between the U.S. and Rwanda, that much of a matter at this point?
Right. I think that it matters for several reasons. It might be easy for some to conclude that it's a small scuffle, especially when there's such talk of a trade war with China or the European Union, and there are bigger issues on the trade agenda for the United States. But there are a few angles to this issue that make it important. The first is that Rwanda is trying to establish domestic industry, and it's got a vision of economic growth that involves creating jobs domestically and improving manufacturing. And that's part of its core vision for its economy and its growth. And that is something where the African Growth and Opportunity Act and the United States, I think, should be supporting. And the fact that it's coming into tension on the secondhand clothes issue is important. The second aspect, though, is that there's a dignity argument here as well. Many have seen the news that China has reduced its importation of what it's called foreign garbage, quote unquote. And here Rwanda is saying that it doesn't want hand-me-down clothes and it wants to build domestic industry and have apparel be part of its economy that is more domestically driven. And there's a lot of sense to that as well. In practice, there will be an enormous challenge, though, from Chinese ready-made clothing that already floods the Rwandan market. And by the way, it's about 4 times the amount of used clothing in terms of imports. So there will be challenges. But I think the issues in terms of what's at stake are what is driving Rwanda, and then also how is the United States responding to that, and how is the United States perceived in terms of its goals and what it's trying to do with respect to U.S.-Africa relations.
Now, Grant, do you really think there is a way forward or a way out of this conversation that we're having right now with Rwanda and then the AGOA conversation with the US? Or is there anything happening to see that the trade relationships with US and Africa actually bear some fruits?
I think those are two great questions that need to be separated out. On the Rwanda issue, the United States has said that it wants to continue to negotiate this, but in the meantime, the apparel access, the duty-free access to the US market is suspended. And the Rwandan government seems pretty set in its view, as does the United States. And so I'm not sure that there is a lot of middle ground on this particular issue. I hope that the negotiations and talks will continue. But you're getting at a broader issue as well, which is crucial. And that is, what is the future of the US-Africa trade relationship? The Trump administration has said that it wants to make it a more reciprocal relationship. Again, the African Growth and Opportunity Act is unilateral trade preferences. It's not a free trade agreement. It is not a reciprocal trade agreement. And the Trump administration also recently commissioned a study to look at where some of the potential is in particular markets and particular sectors. So I think that there's some promise in terms of what is being said. But indeed, there's less promise. When the Trump administration is continuing to leave ambassadorships vacant and propose budget cuts toward U.S. economic agencies that are trying to support U.S. companies, I'm concerned that it may just be rhetoric in terms of wanting to deepen U.S.-Africa trade relationships. And I'm concerned both for the future of U.S.-Africa relations and also for the types of companies that I advise each day that are looking to do business in Africa and invest in Africa and are looking for certainty and are looking for policy consistency and are looking for governments, including the United States, to be advancing these stable relationships and helping deepen the investment climate.
Grant, I think one of my last questions has to do with the garment industry in Rwanda, because even when they started saying that they will put more tariffs or even ban the second-hand clothing, it was in the back of the mind having the made in Rwanda products also to gain more market in Rwanda, but also even outside the country. So last year, we did get reports that were suggesting that the country has grown 3 times in the garments and textiles industry in the last 2 to 3 years. So do you think that with the AGOA putting all these restrictions for Rwanda, does it hurt in any way the garments and textiles industry in the country?
I think that is the key question, is how will the Rwandan economic goal of domestic manufacturing fare in light of this? The Made in Rwanda vision is important, and the Rwandan government has said that it wants to create as many as 25,000 jobs with this domestic manufacturing. But in practice, Chinese ready-made clothing is going to be a huge threat to domestic industry, even aside from importing second-hand clothes. Chinese ready-made clothing enters the market at 4 times the rate of second-hand clothes. And many of the times it's skirting paying taxes, and it's really going to be the primary threat, I think, at this point.